On this edition of the program, Hunter Biden, he's guilty. We're going to talk about the gun charges with Stephen Gutowski, break down a little bit of the political fallout. Trump's VP search now has a top tier, according to the New York Times, and a great interview about the reality of keeping politicians safe from assassination attempts. It's all coming up. Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Politics program for June 12th, 2024. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you here in Austin, Texas. The Hunter Biden verdict is in. Guilty on all three charges in his Delaware gun trial. The jury only took a few hours total to decide, although that was split over Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. Now, in a second, we're going to welcome in Stephen Gutowski. He's going to break down some of the charges that Hunter faced, but let's go ahead and break down the political elements first. We have statements from both of the campaigns. Joe Biden saying, as I said last week, I am the president, but I am also a dad. Jill and I love our son. We are so proud of the man he is today. So many families who have loved ones who battle addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out on the other side to be so strong and resilient in recovery. As I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with love and support. Nothing will ever change that. Reports from inside the courtroom that was packed with Bidens, because it is a Delaware trial, said that there was a lot of visible anger, none from the president. Trump, meanwhile, had this statement vis-a-vis Carolyn Leavitt, the national press secretary. Quote, "This trial has been nothing more than a distraction from the real crimes of the Biden crime family, which has raked in tens of millions of dollars from China, Russia, and Ukraine. Crooked Joe Biden's reign over the Biden family criminal empire is all coming to an end on November 5th, and never again will a Biden sell government access for personal profit." Again, you can see the strategy here. Trump campaign does not want to dwell on this. They want to move. They want to use the Hunter guilty verdict as a gateway. Ultimately, though, I don't believe that this matters really at all. If you care about Hunter Biden, you are probably more of a Republican-leaning voter. And if you care that this sets a standard that Biden respects the rule of law and Trump doesn't, you're probably already a Biden voter. So as we speed along this highway of an election, I think that this verdict particularly will be further and further in the rearview mirror. That is, unless Hunter keeps himself in the news. Always a possibility, but who knows? He does have another tax trial that is coming up in California, so you will see more of that. Who would have thought last summer that we would see more Biden trials in the summer leading up to the election than we do Trump trials, when there were 4 of them in the offing? If you want to get real galaxy brain, you might be able to say that this is marginally beneficial to Trump in that it gives you a pathway into the both sides are dirty argument. And Democrats are holding a lot of sway on the idea that Trump's felony convictions are something that are just disqualifying for people. And so if you can take a little bit of steam out of that, maybe it goes a long way. I don't think I really buy it, but just so it's mentioned. Look, the numbers to watch are in the swing states. We're going to talk about that in the update, but for now, let's get to Stephen Gutowski. He joined us before the verdict dropped. As we record this, there are final stages of the Hunter Biden trial, probably the most salacious gun trial that there is to be covered in American politics these days. But there's also a few other Second Amendment issues that we would like to discuss with one of our faves here on the program, Stephen Gutowski of TheReload. How you doing, buddy?
Hi, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Oh, same old, same old. Let's start with this Hunter Biden gun trial. The stuff that you tend to cover is either gruesome tragedy or very, very niche news to the Second Amendment community. This is probably something a little bit more salacious than you get to you get to cover on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it's mainly interesting for my audience because of the political implications of all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the president's son. Um, the jury is deliberating as we record this. It's possible that they might enter a verdict tomorrow, which is also the same day that his father is going to have a big speech to the major gun control groups in Washington, D.C. So, the overlap of that is pretty remarkable, not like anything I think we've ever seen before.
So refresh folks who might be lost in all the other testimony, because part of what is at stake here is whether or not he bought a gun and filled out a form that he was not on drugs at the time. He has since written a book detailing his drug use. Obviously, there was a laptop that had pictures and videos of him using drugs. But what are the actual charges here? What is he on the hook for?
Yeah, all the charges, all three of them revolve around the same basic concept, which is that he was an active drug user or an addict at the time that he bought this gun, which was October 2018. And essentially, one is about the background check form, where there's a question that specifically asks if you are a drug user or addicted to drugs, and he selected no, which they're charging as a lie. And then just straight up possession as a user of illegal drugs is one of the other ones. So it's really all around this question. It's kind of this, charges are all birds of a feather here, and it comes down to whether he was a drug addict at the time that this gun purchase happened. He only had the gun for apparently about 11 days before his then girlfriend and the widow of his brother, Beau
Yes.
Biden, found the gun and threw it in a local dumpster. Which then it was found by a dumpster diving person. Pretty weird circumstances all around this whole situation. But it all comes down to whether or not the jury believes he was a drug addict at the time that he bought that gun.
Yeah. By all likelihood, this is going to be something that will be resolved. That we will have a verdict by the time that this interview airs. So, but you don't believe, by your following of it, everything kind of stems from the same decision that the jury would have to make. So it is unlikely we get any kind of split charges, guilty on one, not guilty on another.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. This is sort of a situation where they had this deal, right, that was set up and then it fell apart. And so you got kind of a classic prosecutor situation where they're like, all right, fine. If the deal's not going to happen, then I'm just going to charge you with everything I can. And so they're all pretty related things. And I think it would be hard to find him not guilty on one and guilty on another. And the only really complicating factor is this. There's an acquittal motion that was filed by Hunter's defense team that brings up a Second Amendment defense to all this, which is kind of separate from what they've been arguing to the jury itself as kind of their main defense. And so you could have a situation where Hunter is convicted on these counts, but then the charges are thrown out, or the convictions thrown out, because the underlying law that this is all based on is unconstitutional as applied to Hunter Biden because of his personal circumstances.
So not that it's unconstitutional in general, just unconstitutional to Hunter.
Well, yes, because Hunter's team had initially filed a motion challenging the statute altogether. It's what's called a facial challenge. So there's no possible constitutional application of the law is kind of how those arguments go. It's a higher bar, right? That was dismissed by the judge with caveat that they could refile later with an as-applied challenge, which is a lower bar because you just have to show that as the charges were applied, as this law was applied to Hunter Biden's particular situation, it was unconstitutional. Now, not necessarily because it's personally Hunter Biden, but just because of the actions involved.
Gotcha.
You don't have to show that anybody who's violated the Gun Control Act and the Brady Bill's prohibited persons list. So there's a list of people under federal law who can't own guns, or categories of people. People who are addicted to drugs, people who are convicted felons, people who've been adjudicated mentally ill. Those categories of people aren't allowed to own firearms, not allowed to possess them even under this law. And we probably talked about this in the past, but this law, these categories have come under a lot of scrutiny since the Supreme Court's 2022 New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. It's a mouthful of an organization. It's an NRA affiliate, but since New York v. that gun rights group against New York, there was a landmark case in 2022 that tossed out New York's concealed carry law, but it also set up this whole new standard for deciding Second Amendment cases. And since that's happened, you've had a lot of challenges to these prohibited persons categories. And I think most famously, nonviolent felons have had a lot of success in challenging the law as applied to themselves. So, for instance, the law just says all felons can't own guns. There's this definition for it, but basically anybody who's been sentenced to more than a year in jail, they don't get to own guns forever after that. And a number of cases have gone through where somebody who was not a violent felon, they're not necessarily dangerous under their conviction. One example is in Pennsylvania, which is the same circuit, the Third Circuit, as Hunter Biden's case in Delaware, this gun case. But this man had lied to obtain food stamps. He underreported his income so he would get food stamps. And that qualified. He was convicted of this or pled guilty to it, and that qualified as a felony under this federal law. And so he hasn't been able to own guns since the 90s when this happened. And he sued over that and has won at the appellate level in the Third Circuit because the court found he wasn't a danger. And under this Bruin standard, this Supreme Court standard, where history and tradition are the key factors, like were these things illegal during the founding era when the Second Amendment was adopted? If not, you can't write laws that do them today because they would violate the Second Amendment. And there weren't laws, according to this ruling, in it's a case called Range, that disarmed people who weren't dangerous at the very least.
Yeah.
And so even though the law may be constitutional for violent felons, right? So it's not a facial challenge saying there's no way any of this could be constitutional. It's just saying, as applied to Mr. Range, who happens to be a nonviolent felon, whose crime it doesn't indicate he's dangerous in any way, the law is unconstitutional. And that's what now Hunter Biden, the sort of construct that he's arguing in this case, and it's kind of separate from what you're hearing from his defense team in the day-to-day arguments in court, because that focuses a lot more on sort of the idea that maybe Hunter wasn't an addict when he bought this gun and possessed it. Which is it's not a constitutional claim, it's just a sort of a factual claim that basically the prosecution hasn't proved that he was an addict at those 11 days he had the gun. So, he could be convicted on that point, that the jury could decide, yes, he was an addict when he bought this gun. And so he lied on the form and he was possessing the gun illegally. But then the judge could decide that based on the new Bruin standard, these charges are actually unconstitutional because Hunter Biden's not accused of being, for instance, a dangerous. He's not accused of being dangerous in the sense that he wasn't accused of threatening anyone with a gun or trying to use the gun in any crimes or things of that nature. That's more or less what they've argued in their brief for acquittal.
You always have to marvel at some of the strange bedfellows that are made, especially in this kind of world of politics, that Hunter Biden becomes the drill bit to excavate some of this Second Amendment law, when I think the people that are following it the most are often probably not people that would describe themselves as super interested in Hunter Biden on a daily basis. One thing that I think we did...
Just real quick on that point. This is similar to an argument you could see Donald Trump use as well in his case, because he was convicted of these 34 felonies in New York on the state level, but that also makes him a prohibited person under the same federal law. It's a different section, of a different category, convicted felon versus drug user, but the constitutional arguments are going to be pretty similar if for instance, Donald Trump goes that direction. We haven't seen him do that yet, but like Hunter has, but they would be in pretty similar
situations. If Donald Trump were to buy a gun on the trail, this would be the argument for. Well, he owns guns. Okay, well, here I do want to get to the Trump thing in a second. One more question about the Hunter trial, because one of the things that you have heard from people defending Hunter Biden, and I do believe that we talked about this when the charges were first announced, is that historically these charges are very rarely the meat of a trial or a case brought against somebody, even in the world of gun crimes. These are often things that come after something else. Like there is a robbery, there is an assault, but then, we also got you on the idea that you're a drug addict and you were not allowed to own the gun. You were not allowed to buy the gun in the first place. That is still the case here, right?
Yeah, so this case is a little bit rare in that regard, in the sense that these are the only charges he's facing. Usually these are tack-on charges, or there's something where they want to get somebody on something more serious, like dealing drugs or something like that, but they might not have the evidence for that. Like they're suspecting that this person has done a lot more, but it's easier to prove that they were, addicted to drugs and owned a gun, depending on the evidence you find. And there's a lot of evidence in this case that Hunter was both of those things, including his own book, right, that he wrote.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the other thing, is that very rarely do you get somebody that has a laptop with a bunch of self-uploaded incriminating evidence, a Pornhub account where that has also been uploaded, and a book for which he got paid handsomely for after recovery, where he detailed his drug use and the timeline therein.
Yeah, and so the book really kind of ignited a lot of this, I think, because he went around. The laptop is from several years before this all happened, right? And so you could still make that argument that the defense is making, that like, well, maybe he used to be an addict, but he was clean at the time that he bought this, and maybe he even relapsed later on. That's kind of the argument they're making, that he had gone to rehab. There isn't sort of they dispute whether there's direct evidence he was using drugs at this exact period in time, this exact 10-day period. And that's what they're trying to convince the jury of. But yeah, that book and the audiobook, so him reading his book, was played during this trial as evidence against him. And he admitted, back when they had the deal that fell apart, he admitted that the book sort of drove a lot of this prosecution. But yeah, I mean, as far as how common these things are, it's not super common, but it's also not unheard of. This is another thing that kind of shares some similarities with the Donald Trump prosecution and his case, where it's not usual, and it's not usual that people get just this charge in the Hunter Biden case, but it's not the first time it's ever happened either. People are sometimes charged with just this possession while being a drug user crime, and that's where you've seen some of these constitutional precedents come from. Daniels is another case, deals with a marijuana user, but his only crime was, as far as at least what's in the case that led to a precedent in this constitutional question. He was just somebody who happened to have a gun and weed. So it's not something that's like, oh, this was the first time anyone's ever been charged with this. It's just not a common thing.
Let's swing over to Trump real quick. Obviously convicted on 34 counts. Many people have heard that here and elsewhere. He is a self-described gun owner. Is he legally allowed to own guns at this specific stage? Is there like a surrendering period, or is this all up in the air as we look at the appeal process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the conventional wisdom at the moment is that he cannot possess firearms at all. So that's the key thing here too. It's not just like buying them. You can't possess them. You can't hold them in your hand, anything like that. There's also
possess means to have it on his person. Does it matter if it is in his house, one of his houses?
That's where you get into a little bit trickier questions of what they call constructive possession, which is where all they have to show is that you have access to the firearm. Because this comes up in, there's lots of people who get convicted of felonies, right, and lose their gun rights because of it. Certainly Trump is not the first one to have this happen. And the thing is, just because, for instance, your spouse gets convicted of a felony and they lose their gun rights, does not mean that you lose your gun rights. So you can live in the same home as somebody who's a convicted felon or somebody who's not allowed to possess firearms and still own firearms yourself. The big thing is that you have to make sure that you store them in a way that the felon or the prohibited person can't access them. So basically, you have a safe that you would put them in, for instance, and make sure that they don't know the combination to the safe. And this, now when you're talking about the former president, who has a security detail around him all the time, it makes the security questions that come from this a little less important, but it also does raise like a lot of things when you're talking about a former president being convicted of a serious crime. It's going to raise a lot of weird questions. Like what if he gets sentenced to jail time? How would that work for the Secret Service? Nobody knows. But it's a similar question here. Like, what does constructive possession constitute in the context of somebody who's surrounded by armed men all day? Presumably it's not going to be a problem because they kind of have to leave their guns lying around. If you have it secured on your person, like if you carry or you're a law enforcement officer, I don't think that's going to come up as constructive possession under the statute, or that anyone would actually try a case like that. But it actually does kind of come up in the and I talked about this before, because the thing is, even if you're just under felony indictment, you can't obtain new guns. It's a little bit of a weirdly written law. You can keep the ones you have, but you can't get new ones. Like, you can't buy them and no one can give them to you. And that actually becomes a problem for somebody who's running as the pro-gun candidate. I mean, losing your gun rights altogether becomes a problem for somebody running as the pro-gun candidate in a race, right? But also this inability to possess firearms now or obtain new ones previously becomes an issue, because when you're running as the pro-gun person in a campaign, people tend to give you guns on the campaign trail, like commemorative guns, and especially Trump, people make guns with his face on them, and they'll then hand. That's got to be an interesting, a donation box that gets passed around. I have not seen that in any of the Trump rallies that I have covered, but I guess maybe there's a PO box or something. You just send your gift guns to a PO box Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, this came up last year when he was on a campaign stop at a gun store, which I don't. That's another one. Like, can he still go into gun stores?
Can he go to gun stores? Yeah. Can he walk the dealer hall at like Turning Point or something like that might have a reseller on the floor? Probably,
but it does. This raises questions you wouldn't normally have to ask in these situations. But he was at a gun store, Palmetto State Armory, and he. Somebody showed him one of these guns that has his face on it, and he said he wanted to buy it, and they were going to hand it. So this has come up before. In fact, one of the few times that his campaign has kind of walked back statements that they've made about things, which is obviously not not something they often do.
Not often done with the Trump reelect.
No, and so they did that in this case because they had basically claimed that he committed a new federal crime by obtaining this gun, and then they were like, actually, no, he didn't, and I believe them. I don't think he actually did, because I don't think anyone in the Palmetto State Armory, the gun dealers, would have allowed it to happen, because they know the law pretty well, presumably. But yeah, so it creates a lot of complications in that regard. He can keep he owns at least 3 guns, as far as we know, from a CNN report about how he had a concealed carry license in New York. He's had one there for a long time, and it's going to be revoked as part of this, the result of this conviction.
So even before an appeal, just on the initial conviction, it's gone, and then it would be restored, presumably, or you would have the ability to restore it if there was a appeal.
Yes, yeah, that's my understanding of it. Basically, on conviction, you're a prohibited person.
That's it.
And then, yeah, if you win on appeal, your rights become restored. He can also, I mean, there's a couple ways he could get them back anyway, even if he doesn't win appeals. One is the constitutional challenge that we mentioned earlier. Like, if he wants, he can go down that path. There is there's actually sort of a technical argument he can make in addition, or instead of the constitutional argument, because there's an exemption in federal law for certain kinds of business-related felonies, and this was technically like a falsification of records conviction. It was in furtherance of this cover-up scheme, but the crime itself was falsification of business records, basically just lying about what he was paying Michael Cohen for. But so it's not clear whether that falls under this exemption or not. It's sort of this rare thing that can come up. There is an exception for like certain kinds of business crimes don't lead to prohibited person status. So maybe they'll try that instead of the constitutional challenge. Constitutional challenge, weirdly enough, would be probably more politically beneficial for them if they wanted to go that route. It's kind of a statement thing that he could do. And then the other way that he could get it back is by having his record expunged, which is possible if Florida is where he lives. Florida follows basically New York's, wherever he was convicted, it follows what they do. And so there are ways. They're not easy, especially not for your average convict, but somebody in Trump's
class,
somebody who has the means can there are avenues to get your rights restored. It's just that they tend to be very difficult to do in practice if you don't have the resources.
Well, you can add that to the very, very busy docket for his legal slate with 3 other cases, a Supreme Court hearing, and then anything that's going to happen with this one as it matriculates down the field. I want to ask you about the NRA. This is probably the first time that I think that you ever came on the show. We were talking about some of the problems with the NRA and where it stood with the Second Amendment crowd broadly. Since then, there has been a leadership change. What is the state of the NRA as you see it?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about negative developments in the NRA the last couple of years on the show, and that's because that's mostly what there was to talk about with the NRA.
Because that was the news.
Yeah, it was a lot of negative news for a long time with the NRA. Now they have some actual positive developments. One of them is this success by reform candidates in the recent leadership elections for the NRA. You've got essentially 3 of the 4 top leadership positions were filled by people who ran on a reform slate or ran on a reform platform, and people who wanted to bring more transparency to the organization and kind of turn things around from where they're headed, because their financials are still on a downward slope for sure. And they lost this first round of the New York corruption trial, the civil trial. The jury found the NRA and its former leadership, like Wayne LaPierre, were in the wrong, or Wayne LaPierre was liable for millions of dollars in damages to the NRA because he diverted the charity funds to personal expenses like private flights. And then they found that the NRA itself, as an institution, didn't safeguard its charitable assets. So basically, overwhelmingly negative outcome in that case. And then that's the context for these reformer elections. This happened after that verdict, but before the sort of sentencing phase of this trial gets underway. So there is some reason to think maybe the judge will take this into consideration, depending on what these reformers are able to do before next month, because the second phase of this trial starts next month. In fact, the judge just dismissed the NRA and Wayne LaPierre and others' attempts to have the jury decision thrown out. So the case is gonna proceed. But there is some hope, I think, now that they will be able to either institute significant changes before the judge has his turn to make a decision on what to do with the NRA, which could include appointing government monitors to track its finances or its organizational structure. So it'd basically be kind of having the government come in and oversee what the group does, which could, I believe they would even have the power to fire employees and things like that. So pretty significant takeover in that sense, and they may be able to avoid that, and they also may be able to settle the case even before they get to that jury, or sorry, the sort of sentencing portion, which would be a huge thing to get out from under all this after 5 years of this ongoing scandal. And then of course they also had a big win at the Supreme Court too.
And what was the Supreme Court win?
They had a unanimous decision. It's not related to this civil case, not directly. It's sort of tangentially related. There was a 9-0 decision in favor of the NRA in a First Amendment case that dealt with other New York officials, specifically the head of the Department of Financial Services from a couple years back, 2018. After Parkland, she had threatened essentially the insurers who were working with the NRA on a concealed carry insurance program, and she threatened them to drop business with the NRA and any she called them gun promotion organizations, or she was basically going to start investigations into other types of insurance that were similar to the carry guard proposition that are run by other organizations. Just basically the court found that was a First Amendment violation that she was going after, at least as things were pled. It's kind of at an early stage in that case, so it's not the final decision, but it is a 9-0 unanimous decision where the ACLU was on the NRA's side. Even the Department of Justice was on the NRA's side in large degree, and all 9 justices agreed with the NRA in that case. So it's a bit symbolic in the sense that they still have to go through a lot more litigating to get to the end of that case, but it's always going to be a positive outcome when the courts unanimously agrees with you. When Justice Sonia Sotomayor is writing in favor of the NRA as the that's
it's clearly popular position.
Yeah, it's something that's going to give them at least a PR boost. I mean, we're talking about it right now. It might not solve all their problems. They're going to have to do a lot of internal work to do that, but it does help. That's pretty big news. Now, it did come out the day that Donald Trump got convicted, so it kind of got overshadowed.
Got buried a little bit, but
it's still
they'd rather take the win than take a loss. One last thing on your way out the door. I asked my stream chat this morning. I mentioned that you were going to be on a little bit later in the day I asked if they had any Second Amendment questions, and so we'll do one for the sickos here because this one came in, and I know that you probably have an answer. Are silencers going to lose the tax stamp?
That's a good question. Probably not anytime soon. I think people, a lot of especially online gun activists, are very unhappy with the National Firearms Act and a lot of the regulations it has, especially on things like silencers and suppressors, because those are extremely popular. There's millions of them that people own. There isn't a particularly good reason why they should be subject to the same sort of regulations that machine guns are, fully automatic weapons. But you don't really see that same sort of appetite from either lawmakers, who most of them, even the pro-gun ones, don't know what the National Firearms Act is. This is a law from the 1930s that heavily regulated machine guns and short barrel shotguns and rifles and suppressors. And I don't know that that's gonna ever. I think it'd be hard to see getting to like 60 votes in the Senate for removing suppressors from the NFA. There has been efforts to do this. It's been one of the top sort of legislative priorities of the pro-gun movement for a while. But they've never really gotten close to even passing it in the House when Republicans controlled it. There's a bill called the Hearing Protection Act that would remove suppressors and silencers from those extra regulations of the NFA. You just have to pass a background check to obtain them. And then the courts, too, have not seemed super eager to go down the NFA sort of rabbit hole, if you will. They're much more focused on these felon in possession bans, a lot of stuff that actually gets prosecuted much more often. Felon in possession law is probably the most common gun charge that you'll come across. So that, and that prohibited person list, that's at the center of the Hunter Biden case, at the center of the Trump situation with his gun rights. So I just don't see them ending up at the court anytime soon. Maybe eventually. Bruin sort of implies that it would be that the NFA is not constitutional, but the court, like the standard itself, we didn't have anything like this NFA registry at the founding era, and I think it's hard to imagine analogs to it that are a great fit. But at the same time, the Supreme Court has in dicta, the parts of the rulings in gun cases where they're not binding, but they kind of represent maybe where the court is at if you're trying to read tea leaves kind of thing. And in those situations, that Heller talked about how it's not casting doubt on bans on machine guns, which is the NFA. In fact, the NFA was amended in 1986 to go even further on machine guns, made them illegal to sell to civilians at all. Didn't do that with suppressors. But I will say there is some good news, though, for people who like suppressors, which is that the ATF is actually, I think to a lot of people's surprise, really sped up the process for legally obtaining silencers and suppressors. So it still has this tax stamp that you have to pay. It's $200. They just tax you $200. Technically, the National Firearms Act is a tax law. It's the registry is to show that you've paid the tax. It's kind of a BS thing because nobody actually treats it that way. If you look at, for instance, the pistol brace situation a little while ago, they waived the tax. You still had to register that you paid the tax that you didn't have to pay. You know what I mean? So it's kind of everybody knows what it really is, but
that it's a registry, but it's a registry for money and not a registry for guns. But also, if you don't pay any money, you still have to register the fact that you didn't pay any money.
Exactly. Nobody cares in the government about the tax part of it. It's kind of ironic because it was just passed in 1934. The intention was to try and ban these guns and accessories because in 1934, $200 per item would have been extremely expensive.
Massive.
For anyone trying to register these things. But they didn't peg that to inflation. So today, it's still not great. Because
I mean, today it might be a family going to the movies at this point.
Right.
So,
a suppressor is a metal tube with some baffles, and it's literally the exact same technology as your muffler. Same guy invented it, same purpose. But so $200 added on tax is, it's not great, but it's not prohibitively expensive anymore. And the ATF has actually sped up the processing time for applications for these kinds of devices and other guns on the list. And so you can actually get a suppressor pretty quickly. It used to be like 9 months or more in some cases, where you'd have to wait for them to just accept your registration, right? Now it can be less than a month, which is pretty remarkable speed up. So that's while I don't know that there's you never know. You could get a case that I could certainly see a district court judge issuing something on suppressors, especially given how popular they are. I think a lot of people look at them as they look at the Heller test, which was about how handguns are in common use for lawful purposes. That's the standard they set. And they look at something like suppressors, and there's millions of them out there owned legally by millions of Americans. And they think, well, okay, this should also fit that standard. Even ignoring kind of the Bruin expansion of that test. And I wouldn't be surprised if you got some district judges who start to believe that and rule that way. But it's not something that we've seen percolating up through the courts to this point.
Well, there we go. I got a substantive answer about the silencer and the tax stamp. So for the person in the chat, hopefully you have helped to edify many other gun owners and enthusiasts who are in the listening audience, or terrified those who hate guns. Either way, the information is yours to do what you will with. The Reload is, in my opinion, the best writing that I read on Second Amendment stuff. It is run by Stephen Gutowski. Thank you so much for joining us, buddy.
Hey, thank you.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you support this show. News is moving fast, guys. It's moving fast. And if it's moving fast, that means you need the 2 extra episodes each and every week. $3 gets you that. Price of a cup of coffee. If you'd buy me a cup of coffee once a week to sit in your car and talk politics, well, then there's a way that you can do that virtually. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 level gets you 2 bonus episodes. The Biden administration is nearing the completion of a treaty with Saudi Arabia to strengthen U.S. defense commitments in exchange for Riyadh normalizing relations with Israel. The success of the deal, apparently, hinges on Israel's support of a separate Palestinian state and an end to the Gaza conflict. Hold your breath. The U.S. aims to facilitate Israel's acceptance into the Arab and Muslim world through this agreement. The strategic alliance would elevate Saudi Arabia's regional status and reinforce U.S. military involvement in the Middle East. The treaty does need 2/3 Senate majority, likely requiring Saudi Arabia's commitment to establish ties with Israel. The broader deal includes a U.S. support for a Saudi civilian nuclear program, which, has a tendency to border on other nuclear programs. And the agreement marks a significant shift in U.S.-Saudi relations previously strained by human rights issues. A reminder that candidate Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. once said that in his administration, he would relegate Saudi Arabia to the pariah status that they deserved. This coming after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a United States resident and columnist, occasional guest columnist for the Washington Post. Well, what a difference 4 years makes. Now we want to make a defense agreement, meaning that the United States would step in if Saudi Arabia got into a regional war, and we want to give them the ability to develop nuclear programs. All of this, of course, hinges on the idea that they would normalize their relationship with Israel. It's a hardening of our access against Iran. I have no idea what the Biden State Department, which way they are going. This process, I think, has been a long time coming. Saudi Arabia, I think, wants to normalize. They get more out of a relationship with Israel than they do any kind of relationship with a nascent or currently non-existent Palestinian state, at least formally. But I just am getting a little tired of the Biden administration, their State Departments announce first, hope it happens later kind of approach. How many times have we seen them attempt to appear like they are leading the ceasefire conversation and then nothing to happen? And sometimes they blame Netanyahu, sometimes they blame Hamas, but they just don't have anything under control. That's the reality. Initially, the White House blamed Hamas believing that this particular deal was about to get done for October 7th. Let's remember that. So, it is what it is. We'll see. But if all of this is contingent upon Israel recognizing a two-state solution, that's going to take a minute. Because for Israel, let's say even Netanyahu gets out. Netanyahu ain't doing it. Let's say Netanyahu gets out. You still need some kind of concept from any Israeli leadership that would demonstrate that there is a partner for which they would want to build a neighboring nation with. And then that has to begin to happen. So I don't know. To say that this is close and then say the only sticking points are these things that are really, really, really difficult, then are we really close? Speaking of Gaza, the Biden administration is considering negotiating directly with Hamas for the release of 5 American hostages held in Gaza if current ceasefire talks with Israel fail. These negotiations, facilitated by Qatari intermediaries, would exclude Israel. The U.S. aims to secure the release of Eden Alexander, Sagi Dekel Chen, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland Omer Nuertra, and Keith Siegel. They would also be recovering the remains of 3 deceased Americans. The potential unilateral deal would strain U.S.-Israel relations and pressure Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire. Despite the challenges, the options remain viable if the current ceasefire efforts do not progress. This leaks the same day that the State Department is saying that Hamas is the reason why the ceasefire deal isn't happening. That Israel's on board, it's up to Hamas. So it's so up to Hamas that America wants to make a deal. I don't know. I assume there's very smart people involved in all this. I assume they have a handle on it. But it's just hard for me, as somebody who follows this really closely, to follow the logic. If Hamas will not sign on to a deal for which you've already brokered, then what makes you believe that we have something to offer them? And this is a trial balloon article, I'm presuming, because it doesn't mention the actual story that would be there, which is if we are making a deal with Hamas to release 5 American hostages, what are we giving back? If it's a deal, we're not demanding, we are not saying that we are leveraging X, Y, or Z. We're making a hostage deal. What are we, the United States of America, going to give to Hamas in exchange for 5 people and 3 dead bodies? That's going to be the big question that we have to answer. Okay, some election stuff. First, New York Times report this morning. There has become a hardened top tier of the vice presidential nomination selection process for the Trump campaign. They put the following 3 people in the top: Doug Burgum, J.D. Vance, and Marco Rubio. Old heads will know. So that drops out Tim Scott. Tim Scott is now outside looking in. He, at least the last time I checked the betting markets, was the number one favorite. So that's kind of the big news. If you are following the Kremlinology around this, that would be the headline. Tim Scott dropping in favor. I have long thought that Doug Burgum and J.D. Vance were the two most likely. Doug Burgum, to me, seems like the most likely. He's the package that it looks like Trump is looking for right now, in that he's connected to a lot of really rich people who have not come off the bench to support Trump. So you get the immediate. That would have been the really big reason why Nikki Haley needed to come on. He has executive experience, and he's not bad on television. He's good on television. You know, Trump needs a television warrior. It's probably why Tim Scott is not there. He's not great on television. Not bad, but he's not great. Doug Burgum's a fighter on TV. J.D. Vance is a fighter on TV. Marco Rubio is a fighter on TV. The New York Times says that Trump likes Marco Rubio because he likes the idea of somebody campaigning in Spanish. Very interesting. That sounds, sometimes you have these Trump details that you're like, is that so weird that it makes sense? Or is it so weird because, of course, it's the guerrilla channel when it comes to Trump? It's so inside my matrix of how Trump would act that it just makes sense. J.D. Vance, according to the New York Times, is kind of also everything that the Trump team wants, but they're hesitant about his age. Younger than me, 39 years old, so we'll see. The other big news for election, folks, is that 538 has dropped their projections. This is very interesting. This is the first set of presidential predictions that 538 has ever done without their founder, Nate Silver. They will obviously be watched very closely. It'll be curious to see how much Nate Silver decides to critique these models. He is going to release his own, so we will know what his gap is. But as it stands right now, 538 says that the fundamentals of the race put Biden in a very narrow position. It's essentially a 50-50 race. They put Biden in a very narrow, advantageous position to Donald Trump, specifically because Donald Trump's leads, which just straight by the polls are pretty large in the Sunbelt states, they are still there, but much more diminished in 538's estimation. Arizona, they have Trump up 0.7, Nevada 0.9, Georgia 1.5. That's kind of interesting that they have Georgia as the best state there. Nevada in some polling has been better, but 538, not so much. Meanwhile, the reason why Joe Biden is the favorite right now, very narrow, right, 50-50 race essentially, is because 538 with their model puts Biden ahead in those Rust Belt states. Pennsylvania, he's up 1.5. Wisconsin, 1.5. Michigan, 2.1. There will be a lot discussed on Friday's edition of the program. We are going to have a first-time guest and somebody that I'm very excited to talk to because I enjoy his writing. Edinger Mentum is going to be on the show, and I'll be sure to ask him a few questions about what he thinks of 538's methodology. A reminder, Take Politics Seriously is where you need to go if you want to get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. One on Monday morning, one on Thursday. And this is going to be a good one because anything that happens between Tuesday afternoon and Thursday, that's all going to be bonus material. So any fallout from the Hunter Biden trial, that's all going to be on the bonus because we're getting this one out early. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. One of the things that I've said often on this show is that no matter how chaotic our political world gets, it could always be worse, and it has been worse in our recent political history. In fact, in the late 1960s, we saw multiple different politicians and thought leaders murdered in cold blood. And so, although the thought is morbid, I want to bring on somebody to help us understand how we prevent these kinds of things. And that's why we have brought on Anthony Burnside. He is a 20-plus year expert in the world of threat assessment, security specialist, a private investigator, and has worked with VIPs, politicians, athletes, and the like throughout his career. The biggest names and the biggest award shows as well. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start here. What does your job entail when you are talking about guarding and assessing threats for politicians specifically?
It entails protecting the person, asset, and reputation of the protectee or principal or asset, and reduce the possibility of any type of attack or threat happening to almost zero.
So when you get a call, it just generalize on a situation like this. How early out do you get a call? When does your work begin, and when does it end?
Well, we like to get as much lead time as possible, but sometimes it can start that next day, a few days prior, or sometimes that same day. And you just have to hit the ground running.
And your job is to be scouting out the area, assessing
Right.
where, like, walk us through the lead up to it.
Let's say if we get a call for a VIP, and sometimes they will have some security already in place, and I'm supplemental, or I'm the main guy. And what usually happens is if I have enough lead time, I advance every place the principal is going to be, and make sure that all threats in each area is mitigated to the possibility of zero. And we move them in that protected bubble. That's roadways have to be advanced if possible. And we try to do that.
So when you say advance, just for our layman audience, that means scouting everything out and
scouting everything out
through your brain, knowing where are the vulnerabilities and where do they need to be mitigated.
That's exactly right. I do not take a client to any area that has not already been advanced yet. It's choreographed. It's like a dance. Everything is checked out beforehand. You never take a client into an unvetted area.
Now, obviously, if you are guarding an award show or there's a VIP that wants to go out for a night on the town, some of that has its own challenges. Politicians have a bit of a hybrid, right? Because it's a choreographed place for which they are going to be arriving, but also you have a bunch of people that are hopefully for the politician going to show up and hear their message. How do you understand crowd control?
Well, the way we understand it is I would prefer not to bring my client into a crowd or a crowded area. A lot of things can happen bad in a crowded area, especially if it's an unvetted crowd. Now, it's possible certain precautions and protocols are put into effect, put into effect. So, and then you have a smooth operating time. But crowds, especially unvetted crowds, can be dangerous. You don't know who's lurking. But there are protocols we can put in place to mitigate those threats. And we try to do it to the best of our ability each time. But if I had my way, I would not have my client in the crowd.
So in preparing for this interview, and I came across you because you've been writing a lot on your on social media, going over various different situations that you've noticed in terms of politicians that have had negative interactions with crowds. A foreign politician who got slapped. You broke down the Shinzo Abe assassination in Japan, and looking at all of these situations where there was a lapse in security that could have been mitigated. And one of the things that seems to be a consistent theme is, especially in America, where we have a wide range of politicians that get famous on a level to draw very, very impassioned crowds, but do not have consistent security.
Right.
Let's think of everybody that you see that are regular names on cable news, your AOCs and Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, that
Of course.
you've pointed out that this is like a really a dangerous mix, because the security isn't there, but you have a lot of passion. Can you just talk about some of those situations that you've seen and why they raise alarm bells for you?
Well, I've always stated that all security are not created equal. It just isn't. And when most people think of security, they think of it as all the same. That's like saying, is a Bugatti or a Bentley or a Rolls Royce the same as a Pontiac or a Chevy?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they're cars, but one is the other is a much better quality of vehicle. You get a little bit extra as opposed to the one that's a much more lower quality. Not to say it's a bad car per se.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because all cars drive, but we have to think of gradations. Perfect example: a foot doctor, a heart doctor, and a brain surgeon. They're all doctors, right? But each one possesses a particular skill set. I would not ask a podiatrist to do brain surgery, yet they're still a doctor.
Yeah.
But they're specialists. A podiatrist specializes on feet. A pediatrician specializes with children. A cardiologist is a specialist with the heart. A brain surgeon or neurosurgeon is a specialist when it comes to brains. Security is the same way. You want a particular specialist. Most politicians, especially our people in Congress, they don't have a regular security detail. Some don't have one at all. What they do is when they visit a venue, they get a makeshift. They acquire a makeshift detail. And sometimes this is someone who's worked security. Sometimes it's an off-duty cop. Nothing is wrong with that, but the training is different. We look for threats differently. We look for predictor behaviors. And this is why, perfect example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she went to, I think it was Virginia, North Carolina, to scout for this politician, she did have a few police officers there, and they were walking her down a path. Now, it seems to me that this was done, kind of makeshift. If this was a film, we call it cinema verite. They just start walking down this path. Okay, well, in EP, we wouldn't have done that. Matter of fact, I would have called off the event. But she's walking down a path in an unvetted crowd, and I don't have to tell you the dangers of an unvetted crowd. And can you hear me?
Yeah. No, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so she's walking down the path with the bullhorn. Her security guys, I think maybe she had one personal guy. I can't really tell. But when you watch the video, we're trained to scan 360 degrees. We have to protect you 360 degrees in all directions. There's people that swarmed them, and there's people that are walking alongside her. One woman was hurling death threats, for Christ's sake. No one thought of apprehending her. When you leave yourself open, and Marjorie had a lot of openings, someone could have hit her, shot her, stabbed her with a brick. If, human reaction times being 2.25 seconds, someone could have rushed upon her and stabbed her in the neck, and her security team would not have been able to react effectively. And that's the problem. Most people just think all security is the same, and it doesn't. And we can always tell because of these attacks that happen.
So and if we're going to, as lay people, understand the difference between it, what I would guess, as somebody who has a very, very, very amateur's understanding of this field, is that you have your like off-duty cops. These are people that are certainly trained for crowd control on some level. They have the ability to
Of
arrest
course.
somebody if they get too rowdy. There's going to be an element, especially if they have their badge showing, of authority that could cow somebody, but they are not going to be the ones out there 12 hours before scouting a route and making sure that there is a choreographed, phalanx of bodies
Of
on
course.
either side to do
Right.
something like that. So let's say you were organizing an event where Marjorie Taylor Greene does want to meet the people. What is the safest way to do something like that?
Well, we will find out what the event is, and then where will it be, where it would take place, and then we will scout the location and any threats that may present themselves. We will mitigate that to the best of our ability. If there's going to be a crowd, we're going to set up choke points where we can vet the crowd. Now, sometimes, again, all of these techniques and protocols aren't always possible. Sometimes you have to do it on the fly, but even then, you want to mitigate those threats. You need to hire more security guys, and we have different formations. It's like football. I'm a big football fan.
Sure, yeah.
Of course, Kansas City Chiefs been the best football ever. Pat Mahomes, the greatest quarterback ever. But I'm not biased.
There we go.
I am
All
not-
right, yeah.
I'm not biased.
They're the champions. You deserve to crow.
You're a good man. But if you noticed, and I'm also going to bring in Floyd Mayweather for a second too. But let me go back to football. When you're watching the Chiefs play, or any football team, but I'm going to go ahead and say the Chiefs. You got to be able to read defenses. You got to be able to read offenses on the fly. Maybe the plan you had may not work in this particular moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So when Patrick Mahomes during the Super Bowl that we won, you notice that you had some people when the ball was snapped, he goes back. They thought he was going to throw to Pacheco because Pacheco can run and make holes, but he ends up throwing to McCole Hardman on the outside and get the winning touchdown. Well, EP security kind of works like that. We read everything. You got to read the defenses.
Yeah.
Because things are always ever changing. Okay, maybe we're going to utilize this particular plan. Okay, now we have to change it up. Everything has to be customized for each person. If you look at Floyd Mayweather, one of the things that make Floyd Mayweather great is that when he fights an opponent, he doesn't fight the opponent the same exact way.
Yeah.
He fights him a different way each time, which makes it hard to watch the tape. He mitigates it.
So when you are reading the defense, to use this metaphor, what are you seeing that makes you change? And obviously there's a lot that goes in. This is literally your training. But if you were to just give one example of, what your thought process is to a lay audience, what would you say a big red flag would be, for example?
A big red flag is you look for people that don't look like they belong. Someone who doesn't. What better way can I say this? Someone who looks out of the ordinary. If it's hot in summer and they have a big overcoat on, okay, you kind of want to take notice of that. You know what I mean? Why do you have that overcoat on?
Yeah.
So
just something that stands out that makes you think this is somebody that something weird's going on, or they're trying to hide.
Oh, most definitely. If everyone's exiting a building and you just see someone there and they're supposed to be exiting and you see someone making their way back in, okay, that's a red flag. We need to check that out. And hands. A covered hand is always a threat. Why? Because people hurt and kill you with their hands. You see what I mean?
One of the things when you were breaking down the Shinzo Abe thing was you pointed out, well, this is a huge problem when the assassin who eventually was able to shoot and kill the former prime minister twice, we had his hand rummaging around in his bag for a period of time that should have been flagged, and the dude should have been at least talked to, if not tackled, right?
Oh, of course. Well, that's because the tactics, see, in Japan, gun violence in Japan is almost unheard of, but it can still happen. and Shinzo Abe, because he was shot by Yamagami, and Shinzo Abe, his security team, again, because of where they are, they can only assess threats along the lines of what's possible, what they think could be possible in their country. And the security was very light, and there was no lockdown of the area. People were allowed to mill through very freely. Well, because of that, Yamagami was able to position himself behind the speaker, which is Shinzo Abe, and he had a bag. Well, if that was us, you wouldn't have a bag close to the protectee. Matter of fact, we don't allow book bags and purses in the venue where the protectee is going to be.
Yeah.
Because you can hide things in there, but in Japan, it's a totally different world.
Yeah.
They've never experienced that. There's an old saying, once bitten, twice shy. And the way we learn things is through the algorithm of performance feedback revision. Something happens, we get feedback, then we revise. You stick your finger in a light socket, guess what? You're gonna get shot.
You're gonna learn, yeah.
Exactly. The performance is you sticking your finger in a light socket or using a metal object to stick it in the light socket. The feedback is the shock. The revision is, hey, I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. So that's how humans learn anything. No matter what the discipline is, that's how we learn. Well, in executive protection, it's the same way. We learned so much after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Right?
Yes.
I did a complete threat analysis at Dealey Plaza last year when I was in Dallas for a few days. And it's an interesting read. I will send it to you. But, so they learned how to mitigate these threats. And that's why the Secret Service are now the best in the world. And a lot of their techniques filter down to other EP operatives like myself. So, because of what happened to Shinzo Abe, I think that Japanese security and EP security are going to change their tactics. But there were so many flaws at first. The area wasn't locked down, no barricades. He wasn't enclosed in some kind of protective apparatus. People with bags were allowed to mill back and forth because in their mind, okay, these kind of things don't happen over here. But I guarantee you, when you're dealing with a protectee of mine or a lot of other good EP teams and operators I know, or the Secret Service or even DSS, that is not going to happen. You're not going to have a bag, and you're not going to be behind the president. That's just not going to happen. It's not a thing.
Yeah, I remember. So in my experience as a reporter, if I were in preparation for this, I kind of started cataloging the most safe I feel a politician ever was and the most unsafe a politician ever was. The most safe was certainly when Trump was still president. We had to come in on buses. We couldn't even bring our own cars close to it. The Secret Service had dogs sniff everything that we were bringing, and we were press, so we were allowed to bring in bags. So everybody else not allowed to bring in anything. We were allowed to bring in bags because it's equipment that you need to recover the event, and everything was, all but a strip search in terms of being able to be on the premises with any kind of equipment. The most unsafe was obviously we're going way down the list of the kind of resources you have to protect these politicians, but it was, I believe she was a city councilwoman at the time running for mayor of New York City, Carolyn Maloney, and that was just press was invited to walk along with her as she was just going to various different businesses in this one neighborhood of, I'm going to say Queens, I believe, and just talking to people. And that was a situation where we were all just walking alongside of her to the point where we just got bored. It's like a road trip where everybody had already asked their questions, said what they needed to say, and we were all just now wandering along. But that was no security at all whatsoever.
Right.
What is the level for you of when a politician needs to really think more seriously about security, because we obviously can't put that threshold too low because there's no money for it. And I would imagine that at a certain point you are about at the same level of threat as anybody is walking out of their house.
Right. Well, again, you assess the threat because some people have a low threat. Now, that doesn't mean we have different levels. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 and 4 is pretty much, I don't want to use the word lackadaisical, but it's more relaxed. But 1 and 2, man, those are hot targets. So, of course, you're going to step up the protection. It depends on the person. Someone like ALC has a significant threat profile. Someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene has a real significant threat profile.
Yeah.
Matt Gaetz has a significant threat profile. Ilhan Omar has a significant threat profile. So you will have to customize the security around that. A lot of death threats to sift through. And so RFK Jr., I wrote extensively about him. He has a very significant threat profile just because of who he is.
Yeah.
But he has a really good team around.
I want to get into RFK because that is probably the biggest thing that I am worried about. I do quick correction. I walked with Catherine Garcia, not Carolyn Maloney. Carolyn Maloney was the former congresswoman from New York. Catherine Garcia was the woman that I walked with. She wound up coming in second to Eric Adams, the current New York City mayor. Let's talk about RFK because that is the last most significant fatal politician shooting that we have had in at least American history, of somebody that was the front runner for the race. Obviously, Reagan was shot as president, but he did not pass away. You now have his son running, and it's there's been some controversy that he has not been given Secret Service protection. What is your take on all that?
With RFK and the Secret Service protection?
Yeah.
Well, I wrote extensively about that. Here's the deal. I met RFK Jr. Mm-hmm. I think he's a nice guy. I'm a big fan of the Kennedys. I love John F. Kennedy Jr. I love his father, his mother, his sisters. The problem with RFK Jr., the only problem that I have is that he's not being honest about his security. Okay. I mean, one of our primary jobs is we recreate the security footprint wherever our guys go. That's basically what I mean by moving them in the protective bubble. That's what the Secret Service does. When the president's in the White House, they recreate that same security integrity plan everywhere he goes in the world. And that's basically what we do. Maybe our budget is not as lavish.
Yeah.
But this is what we do. Now, recently, RFK had an incident where a guy showed up with guns and at a speech at the Wiltern Theater, I think, in Los Angeles. I think he should have protection. The problem is the Secret Service has protocols and criteria you have to meet to become a protectee. So, interesting enough, his father, RFK Sr., was shot and killed by Sirhan Sirhan.
Yes.
He walked in a room he shouldn't have walked in, of course, unvetted crowds. And then after that, a law was passed that every nominee, major nominee, that's the actual nominee, will get Secret Service protection. That's because of his father. His death of his father created that law. The problem is for Junior is that he doesn't qualify for Secret Service. He's not a major party nominee. That's one. And it's not up to the president because he keeps saying that Biden is denying him Secret Service.
Biden is denying him, yeah.
Right, but it's not up to Biden. I mean, there's a director of Homeland Security. His decision's important, and of course, it's the rules that Congress has made. So he's being less than honest about not getting his security. Does he deserve it? Hey, I think everyone deserves protection. But
Yeah.
the Secret Service, because there's not that many of them, they have a specific criterion you have to meet. And unfortunately, RFK Jr. does not meet that criteria. And
Yeah,
that's just the end of
and
it.
the
I mean,
other
it's as
the other
simple as
two
that.
the two presumptive nominees for the major parties are both former presidents. So they have, or one is the current president, one is a former president. So they have Secret Service detail for life,
For life.
right?
For life, right. Obama, Clinton, Jimmy Carter, people like that,
Yeah.
right? Now, sometimes, I mean, Obama got his Secret Service protection early because of the nature of who he is and his threats, but he fit the criteria, the criterion.
I mean,
So,
but if anybody's gonna fit the criteria, I don't know. I've got this very grim milestone that I very, very much hope that we cross, which is, the day on the calendar when RFK was shot and killed, which is in the middle of
sure.
July. And I just hope that RFK Jr. gets past it, because, we're in strange times, and that's something that I know that you are very, as a threat assessor, you have assessed a threat that things are a little weird right now. Things seem to be getting a little shaky.
Right. Things are, if you look at what's going across Europe, the factions, the fight between right wing and left wing factions, people are going crazy. And the same thing's happening over here. Politics are almost becoming cult like with certain people. It's almost like religion was in the past.
Yeah.
You don't believe my way, then you're bad and then you're evil. We look at history when Hypatia was murdered. That ushered in the Dark Ages because of hate and ignorance. So our history is replete with these examples. You look at Kashmir, you look at the Crusades, all with an ideology that boil down to I'm right, you're wrong. That's not how it's supposed to go. We have to have a much more open mind.
And I think that that's what the scary part is for people that are in your profession is, regardless of the general trends, you only need the general trend to produce one person who probably wants to die, to do something horrible, to do something awful.
And that's scary because, to quote John Malkovich in not A Few Good Men, to quote John Malkovich in the Line of Fire, Kennedy's favorite poem was I Had a Rendezvous with Death. The issue is, and he says, and that's not a good poem. Here's the facts. I always say, you asked me earlier about threat assessment and protection, and I say we create protocols in an A to Z dynamic to reduce the possibility of something happen to almost zero. And I chose my words very carefully.
Yeah.
No protection is 100%, but believe me, man, we can harden the target to where the would-be assailant would just try someone else. That happened with Nixon, I think with Arthur Bremer, if I'm correct, and he couldn't get to him, so he ended up shooting George Wallace.
Yeah.
When you harden the target, you do it in such a way that the assailant goes, you know what, I'm not going to even try. Let me try someone who doesn't have that much security. And that's usually how it happens. But again, no protection is 100%. And if someone is willing to trade their life to get to you, man, almost nothing can stop them. So we have to be on point. We have to be what I call not being wide asleep, which is an industry term. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, that is certainly a way to go out for people to understand the gravity of this conversation. Anthony Burnside, a 20-year expert in security specialization, private investigator, and all around security expert for VIPs and politicians. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no problem. No problem. I've enjoyed myself.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, 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 written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. I want to thank our guests, Stephen Gutowski of TheReload and Anthony Burnside. I hope you guys really enjoyed that interview as much as I did. I find the concept of security for stuff like that endlessly fascinating, and obviously because the stakes are as high as they are. If you would like to email the show, it is theyoungamerican@gmail.com. You can follow, find, and share video clips of the show. TikTok, Justin R. Young. Instagram, Justin R. Young. YouTube is Politics, Politics, Politics. I asked you guys last week to write in the YouTube comments whether or not you believe that we're mistake. I asked you guys to write in the YouTube comments whether or not we should be covering the Hunter trial. Turns out the world answered those questions for us. The trial is over. We are done. We are not going to talk about it all that much more. But let me ask you guys this. If you're at the end of this, and I'll know. Anywhere that you want to comment, Patreon, the YouTube's a great place because it aggregates a lot better for me. What do you think about two guests? One guest, two guests. Short little monologue up top, two guests. This one fell in our lap. I don't know if I like it. Good? Bad? What do you guys think? Two guests or one guest per episode? Hit me up. YouTube.com/@politics. And I know if you guys are here at the end, you guys are real fans. Justin R. Young is me on X, and px3podcast.com is where you can share the audio version of this podcast. If you would like to support this program with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. That is PAYJURY. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Venmo money isn't real. Prove it. Send me $1. Cash App is PX3Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. P.O. Box 153184, Austin, Texas, 78715. Of course, you can always get the bonus episodes exclusively at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 level gets you 2 bonus episodes each and every week, and now's the time you need them. We can get a VP announcement at any moment. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $10 tier gets you that, plus your name read at the end of the show, like these fine folks in the Titanic. $10 tier. Sugar Brady, Sam, John, Niemeister, Edwin, Brian, and Vote Gloria Young for King of the New World Order. Edison, Jeremy, a dog named Checkers. Sarah Jeannie, Matthew, Dr. G, Shad, Bob, Chill, Dustin, Brad, D. Laser, Nick, Just Another Pilot, Middle-Aged Mike, Utah, Jimmy Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Reilly, Andrew, Lisa, Fat Tony's BJ's from New York, Devon, the CFP, Gloria, Gray Zone, Peepaw, J, Neil, John, DP4, Bongo, Neil, His Nerdiness, Charles, Audrey Stoll Adler's Spot, Darren, Idris, Arslanian, Berkeley, Stephen, Pneumatic, Terran, Molly's Delightful Demeanor, Adam, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, Paul, and Bluefront, and the Lenina. You want your name with them as I throw everything on the ground. Only one place to go, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. On the next episode of the show, as I teased a little earlier, Edinger Mentum joins us. We discuss an article that he wrote, The Narrow Pathway to a Joe Biden Landslide. It's a simple process, 3 steps. We walk through it, and I'm pumped to talk with him because I think he's a good writer and an interesting thinker. That will all be on Friday's episode of the program. Until then, This is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.